leaders. We are in the last week of the unit that's entitled More Than Enough, How Jesus Meets Our Deepest Needs. This week we're looking at our need for purpose from John chapter 15. And the point of the lesson is Jesus is the vine who empowers us to live productive lives for God. So even though this week's text is very easy to read, it's a very familiar passage, there's several different interpretations, and there may be several questions that come up as a result of this lesson this week. Now I want you to keep in mind that at this time in Israel's life, of course, they're a very agrarian society. They know a lot about crops. Also, and I know you know this, but just remember that Hebrew, Greek, these other languages, very similar to English in the fact that one word can have several different meanings. In fact, I know in English there are some words that they may have two different meanings, and those meanings are opposites. But let me give you an example of the word run, R-U-N. Now we know that can mean to move quickly with one's legs. I run when I'm scared. It can mean manages, like I run a business. It can mean offer a service, like they run a weekly special. Or it can mean working, like the car runs fine. Well, Greek is no different in that, and we get to that verse 2, and there's that phrase, cuts off. And that word translated, that comes across translated cuts off, can also mean to lift up. And I learned this when I was studying Bruce Wilkinson's study called The Secrets of the Vine. Did this at Wednesday night study several years ago. Pretty interesting little study. Not everybody agrees with his interpretation. But I did happen to look up in my Greek lexicon that word, that Greek word. I want you to look at it with me. And you see there the word, you may not know how to pronounce it. In fact, you're probably thinking this is all Greek to me. It's pronounced iro, and you can see the different definitions. To take up, to lift, raise, to bear, to carry, to take away, to remove, to destroy, to kill. So that one word can have several different meanings. And so when it says about the branch that the vine dresser cuts off the branch, it can also mean that the vine dresser lifts up the branch. And that's where some of the different interpretations come into play. I also remember in studying that book that Mr. Wilkinson described a time where he met a vineyard owner, and he talked about those new branches that tend to grow along the ground. They kind of go off on their own, not producing at this time. And Mr. Wilkinson was asking him about that. Do you cut those off like you would a sucker on a tree or what? He said, oh, no. The branches in a vineyard are way too valuable. We would never cut off a branch. What we would do is take that branch and lift it up and take it out of the mud, because it does have a chance, or does have a tendency to get muddy. Mildew can set in on those leaves, and we will clean off the leaves very carefully and then tie it back up to the trellis. So for me, this paints a better picture of God the vine dresser, wanting to pick us up out of the dirt and clean us up, put us back on the straight and narrow path, than it does the God who's the drill sergeant, who's waiting there with an axe, waiting for you not to bear fruit and to cut you off and throw you into the fire. So that's kind of how I look at this passage. Now, you may not agree with that. I know there are several other interpretations of that, so that's fine. I'm just giving you a little different perspective here. Also, since that modern-day vineyard owner talked about picking up the branch and cleaning it off, it makes a little more sense also of verse 3, where Jesus says that you are already clean because of the word that I've spoken to you. Without knowing that about the vineyard owner and how they treat the branches, that verse 3 kind of sticks out a little bit. Another thing that the original hearers knew when Jesus was telling this parable is that wood of the branches, by itself, it was worthless. It was too soft of a wood to do anything with. The only thing they really did with it back in those days is if from the prunings or cutting backs or whatever, whenever they would take those branches and they would dry out, they'd just throw them on the bonfire and burned them, which makes more sense as Jesus goes along and talks about the burning of the branches later on in the text. So just a final thought is that the purpose of this life is not to acquire, it's not to achieve, but it's to abide. When we abide in Christ, when we rest in Him, and allow Him to work in us, the result is not just fruit, but much fruit. And that can come in the form of discipleship as we know more about God, and can also come in the form of evangelism as we make God known. That's all I have for you this week. I look forward to starting a new unit next week on Beauty from Ashes.